This is one of the last places you'd expect to see ladies in colorful hoop skirts and men in gray rebel uniforms dancing to the sounds of banjos, fiddles, and old Confederate battle hymns. Yet every spring you'll find them here in this nondescript South American town, keeping alive the heritage and traditions from a bygone era on a distant continent. Nope, this isn't Alabama or Mississippi. This is the Brazilian town of Americana. Over 100 years ago, defeated Confederates fled here from the southern United States, bringing with them their families, slaves, culture, and agricultural expertise. You're about to find out why this happened and how their legacy persists to this day. This is the story of Brazil's Confederados. This is history worth knowing. After 4 long, bloody years of conflict, the American Civil War finally came to an end in 1865. For the landed aristocracy of the Southern Confederacy, the end of the war was more than just a military defeat. It represented an end to their entire way of life. The inevitable economic, political, and cultural decay that was to follow was obvious, and many Southerners looked for refuge elsewhere. Enter this guy, Dom Pedro II, the Emperor of Brazil. With economic ties to both the northern and southern United States, Brazil remained neutral during the Civil War. At the time, Brazil was a relatively young nation with an agriculture-based economy. In fact, 19th century Brazil looked remarkably similar to the Antebellum South. Both were plantation-based economies reliant on slavery. Both were dominated by a small group of landowning elites who enforced a rigid social hierarchy featuring themselves at the top, freed persons and poor whites below, and enslaved Africans at the bottom. While Dom Pedro was personally opposed to slavery himself, he recognized his nation's economy depended on it and feared it couldn't sustain abolition. Brazil and Cuba were the only two countries in the Americas where slavery was legal by the end of the Civil War, and it would remain legal in Brazil until 1888. With the American South's complete domination of the world's cotton market disrupted by the Civil War and up for grabs, Dom Pedro saw an opportunity in the defeated Confederates. In an effort to attract their agricultural expertise and advance Brazil's cotton production, Dom Pedro began inviting Southerners to emigrate to Brazil. He took out newspaper ads and set up informational agencies across the Bible Belt, promising cheap land, subsidized transportation, temporary lodging, and quick citizenship. And sure enough, they came. An estimated 10,000 to 20,000 Confederados made the journey south, arriving in Rio de Janeiro by boat and making the overland journey to an area outside of Sao Paulo that would eventually be named Americana in their honor. Landowning elites welcomed the immigrants and saw them as an asset due to their specialized agricultural knowledge. The Confederados also brought their culture, founding Protestant churches, schools, and cemeteries, some of which still stand today. However, their dream of rebuilding the antebellum South never fully materialized. For one, they were Protestants in a Catholic country. Despite Brazil's religious freedom, this made them outsiders. They also had to adapt to a completely different legal system in a foreign language. Compounding this were disappointments and challenges on the land. Clearing the land was difficult, and the cotton that thrived in the southern United States didn't take as well to the soil and climate of Brazil. And while slavery was still legal, the practice was expensive and in decline. Coupled with their high startup costs, many Confederados simply couldn't afford to buy slaves, making their southern plantation business model unviable. Between the culture shock, soil incompatibility, and financial issues, most of the Confederados packed up and returned to the United States after just a few years. Those that stayed and succeeded had shifted to a smaller scale, more diversified business model. They also adapted to Brazilian culture, learning Portuguese and intermarrying with the locals. But they never entirely gave up their southern heritage. The communities they built were centered around Confederate cemeteries where, along with detailed genealogies, their family names and lineage are preserved. Beginning sometime in the 1930s, the community hosts an annual festival where descendants of the Confederados dress up in antebellum-era dresses and uniforms. The Festa Confederada, as it's called, features traditional Southern dances like the waltz, quadrilles, and square dancing. They also dust off the Southern-style recipes their ancestors preserved, such as fried chicken, buttermilk biscuits, and pecan pies. The whole thing looks like a scene from Gone with the Wind, and I have to imagine it's the only place in the world outside of the United States where you'll see the Confederate battle flag flying proudly. As you can imagine, these traditions have sparked some pushback recently from those who see them as glorifying a racist, backward society. However, most of the Confederados you'd speak with today would insist they're simply keeping alive the story of their ancestors. For them, this is a story about resilience, a story about a defeated people who risked everything to start a new life in a far-off land. People who managed to successfully assimilate into a completely different culture without sacrificing their own identity. What do you think? Should the Confederados of Brazil continue to celebrate their heritage with pride, or is it time to move on? Let me know in the comments, and if you enjoyed this video, please hit subscribe. I'll be continuing to produce content like this and welcome any suggestions or constructive criticism.